and we'll get started. I do have a quick recap for those of you who might need just a little bit of a refresher from last Monday. Your business process is your workflow. If you don't have a business process, you cannot have a workflow. That's first and foremost. So what I'm going to be building today is a reflection of my so-called business process that I have. And your process and your content is your workflow. So when you have your business process and the content that needs to go in that particular process, that's what your workflow is. And the homework that we had last week was to actually build the content in the system. So looking at your process and then building that content that is in that process so you can have a workflow. So just a quick little refresher here, and this will tie into what we talked about last week. You're supposed to write out your process of how you want things to go, and then you're going to color code or somehow highlight the content that you need. And then that's going to give you a comprehensive list of what you need to build in the system. So what I did over the last week, I literally did exactly what you should have done, is I went in and I put in the content that I'm going to need to build my workflow today. So because I've done these prerequisites, you're going to see how easy it is to be able to go in and plug in your workflow. So let me go ahead here and I will move through this. So we're going to talk about actually building a workflow here. It looks like, oh, I do see that there is someone in the chat saying there is no sound. Hopefully you all can hear me. Let me know if you can hear me, if there is sound, or if you all can hear. Okay, perfect. I just had a couple comments there I just wanted to see. So, all right, perfect. So building out your workflow, there are basically three things that you're going to need to do when you build out your workflow. You're going to need what you want. You need to know what you want to do, when you want it to happen, and which piece of content you want to go out. Now, if you remember from last week, that should sound very familiar because when I had you write out your process and kind of told you the right way to do it, those are the three things you should have added to your process. So when you're building your workflow, you're actually just following that exact same sequence. So depending on how well you wrote out your workflow, if you kind of followed those guidelines, it should be very easy to plug it in. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to build out today the inquiry workflow and then the booking workflow. I'm going to actually put those together here. The booked workflow, that could be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. So we're not actually going to build all of that out because that could take a very long time. But the inquiry and the booking workflow, these 9 actions we're actually going to set up here so you can see the transition. So I'm going to go into Dubsado here and I'm going to go to the workflows page, the page you've all been wanting to get to here. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to go through and actually set this up. So what I want to do is I want to set up my framework. If you look at my process here, I have those 3 phases that we talked about last week: the inquiry phase, the booking phase, and the booked phase. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up my workflows with that same structure, and it'll make a lot more sense as we continue to go here. So when I click add workflow, I'm going to go here and I'm going to build out my 3 phases. So because this is a wedding or a bridal workflow, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in first and foremost a little emoji because I love emojis. And what I'll do here is I'm just going to call this bridal, and I'll say inquiry. Okay. So I'm just making that first section there, and we'll click next step. And that's going to be one workflow that I have. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do is if I go back to the workflow tab here, I'm basically going to make my workflow for inquiry, my workflow for booking, and my workflow for booked, all those 3 different ones here. So then I will click add workflow, and I'm going to click bridal, and we're going to say booking because that's our next phase that we're going to have. So we have those 2. And now if we go back to workflow again, I'm going to make one more, and it's going to be for booked. So if I click here, I'm going to make again a nice little emoji here, and we're going to say bridal booked. Okay. So now I have those 3 different workflows. I haven't put the actions in them yet, but as you can see, I have those 3 phases. So because I am OCD, I'm going to reorganize these here because I can't have these out of order. That's just how I operate. So I have these 3 different workflows. Again, this is just kind of the shell of what I'm going to build. So inquiry, booking, and booked. So now let's start with inquiry here, and we'll dive into this workflow. And we're going to open it up here. And we're going to start to build this out. Now, if you don't have a process and if you don't have content, you could come into the workflow and say, I'm immediately overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back and forth in my screens. I'm going to go from this screen over to my process and back and just start to build actions in. So I'm going to reference my first inquiry workflow here. The very first thing that I need to do is I need to confirm the date for the client's event, and that's a task that I need myself to do. So when I'm building a workflow action, and just for this first action, I'm going to kind of explain those 3 things: what you're supposed to do, when it's supposed to go out, and which piece of content. But when I click add action here, this is the modal that's going to pop up. Now, this modal is going to literally follow along with you those 3 things: what you want to do, when you want it to happen, and then which piece of content, if there is any. So when I click this drop down here, and I think it doesn't look like it's sharing on the screen the list of actions, but when you click on the drop down, there is a huge list of actions on the different things that you can do. And it can be very overwhelming if you first click into that and you don't know what it is that you're wanting to do. So in the drop down, I'm going to pick the action that best fits what it is that I'm trying to do, which is going to be create to do, because I'm wanting to make a task. So when I click create to do, that's going to be what it is that I want to do. The next thing that I want to do is choose when I want that to happen. And that's this section right here. The assigned user, just to let you know, just a little bit of extra information, the assigned user, if you choose anybody in this list, you might have multi-users or something like that. But this is basically a way that you can decide that this task goes onto your dashboard. So by assigning it, let's say to myself, that means that when it gets created, it's going to go on my dashboard. Or if you want it to go on a multi-user's dashboard, different things like that. But I'll just plug it in there. Now, the when section here, this is going to be where you basically put together a formula for when this to-do is going to get created. I'm programming the workflow to create this task based on certain stipulations. So here, I can choose, the amount of days or hours or weeks. I can kind of play around with exactly when. If there is a 0 in there, that means immediately. No matter what you have in there, you could say 0 years if you want to. That means immediately. So I'm just going to put 0 days. That's kind of the default that pops up, but that means immediately. And now you have this other box here that has a list of all of the different triggers that you can possibly function with. So project date triggers, form completed or not completed triggers, contract being signed, invoice being paid. We have appointment triggers based off of appointments that are being made. So now I'm going to go here and I'm going to choose the one that best fits for what it is that I'm trying to do. Now, there is something, actually, I'll just go to that in the next action to kind of explain further. But in here, what I want to do is I want this task to get created once this workflow starts, okay? So in here, out of the list, the one that's going to fit the best is after the workflow has started, because think about the logic here is the lead capture is going to get submitted. And once that gets submitted, the lead capture starts the workflow. So after workflow started is going to be the best action for something that you want to have happen as soon as that lead capture form gets completed. So immediately after the workflow starts is basically the formula that I created here. I want to create a to-do. Now, the to-do that I want to create is actually going to be what the task is. So I'm just going to say confirm the date for. And if you've ever created tasks in the workflow, One thing that's really great about them is you can actually use smart fields to provide more context for what it is that you're wanting in that task. So for example, I could say something like confirm the date for, and I can plug in the client's name. So that way when the task gets created, it shows me the client's name. So confirm the date for client name. And I can also put in here the date that they requested, because on my lead capture form, I'm asking them, what is the date of your event? So when they plug in that date, I can now have that translate into this task by saying smart field, project, and then the project start date. So what this is going to do is they'll fill out the lead capture, put in their name and the date of their event. It's going to then send a task right after that says confirm the date for the client name, and then it'll plug in the date that they're requesting so I can look to see if I'm available. So use those smart fields to provide more context for what it is that needs to go into that task versus just saying confirm this date for the client. Then you have no idea what that is. So I have that in there for the smart fields. Now, the other thing with tasks that are really great is that you can send an email reminder to yourself if you want to. So if you want to get an email with that information in there, I can just go in and I can say, send an email reminder. Boom, we're good to go. And that will send an email when that task gets created, and we'll click apply. So in that particular action, we didn't have any content that goes with that. So I'm going to talk about that next. So I have my first action in here, okay? Now, the next thing before we actually get into building this out, I want to go over some guidelines for you for kind of the rest of when we're building out this workflow so that it can help you when it comes to building your workflow. So let me scroll down here. And before we build out this next action, I want to cover these 6 different guidelines and tips, because these 6, I tried to create some good guidelines for you that will just make an abundance of sense once you get in and start building your workflow. Number 1, you can only have either one form or one scheduler per email. You cannot do multiples. You can doing it manually. If you want to send a manual email, we do have ways of doing that. But as far as the workflow and automated emails, you can only have one form or one scheduler per email, not and one scheduler or one scheduler. You can either do one or the other. So that's a guideline. Whenever you're building things out, you have to remember that. But I wrote it out here so you can kind of use it as a cheat sheet. So that's number 1. Number 2, when emailing a form, a questionnaire, proposal, or a sub-agreement, you will always use send form and have a form link in the email. This will make a lot more sense when I start building this out. You'll start to get in the rhythm of this. But anytime that you're sending out one of those 3 things, a questionnaire, a proposal, or a sub-agreement, you will always use send form and have that form link in the email. Same thing with number 3 and a scheduler. Anytime you are wanting to email a scheduler in your workflow, you will always use send appointment scheduler and have a scheduler link in the email. It doesn't matter how else you want to do it. I put always in bold because it is 100% of the time you're going to do that. There's no other way to do that, okay? There is other ways to do it, but it is not correct doing it other ways. Let me just paraphrase there. Number 4, when sending emails that don't have any content, so you're not sending out a form, you're not sending a contract or a scheduler or different things like that, you will use send email. So those 3 things right there basically give you your stipulations. If you look at your process and say, okay, I'm sending out a form, you know immediately I'm using send form as my action, and I need a form link somewhere in the body of my email. If I'm emailing my consultation call scheduler, I know immediately I'm using send appointment scheduler as my action, and then I'm using a scheduler link in that email, no matter what. And as I build this out, you're going to start to see why that makes a lot of sense. And if you don't have any content, no templates, nothing, you'll use send email. So that's kind of the difference there. Number 5, appointment triggers and form triggers, which in our list is after an appointment is scheduled, before an appointment start time, after the appointment is over, or form triggers, which are after a form is completed or after a form is not completed. Those can only watch the schedulers and forms that are in the workflow. So just to kind of clarify with that, a lot of people might have been thinking, maybe you were thinking that with this first action, I would have wanted to use after form is completed because I wanted to watch for that lead capture form. But after form is completed and after form is not completed, that can only watch forms that are in this workflow here. Same thing with schedulers. It can only watch scheduler templates that are being sent in this workflow. So if you're embedding your scheduler on your website, you can't use workflow triggers you can't use scheduler template workflow triggers because that has to be inside the workflow here. So that's what I mean by if you're using a appointment or form trigger, it has to be something that's in that workflow, okay? And then the last thing is, and this is kind of just a general great tip for you, always try to find the most specific trigger possible. Always look through that list and say, is there something that better fits what it is that I'm trying to do? If nothing else is available, then use after all previous actions are complete. And maybe you'll put an approve button or something like that on there. But after all previous actions are complete, to me, should kind of be like a last resort. You should always look at that trigger list and say, is there something in there that better fits what it is that I'm trying to do? The reason why is a lot of people will go into workflows and they'll just kind of slap after all previous actions are complete on everything. And what that's going to do is it's just going to send everything out just like a domino effect. Once this sends, then this goes out, then this goes out. And you don't want that kind of domino effect. It'll send out prematurely. So by looking at that list of triggers and say, okay, this is better for what it is that I'm trying to do. And if you wrote out your process very detailed, so for example, like if they haven't completed the questionnaire in 3 days, that's very specific on when I want that to go out. Not just I want to send out a follow-up email sometime later. You can't say things like that in the workflow. It has to be very specific on when you want it to happen. So when I'm building out the rest of this workflow, you'll start to see, oh, I do need to be very specific on when that's going to go out so nothing sends out prematurely. So those 6 guidelines, as you're building your workflow, just follow those 6 things. And it won't necessarily mean that you're going to build a perfect workflow, but it will basically keep you on the road, not necessarily in the lane that you need to go in, but it will at least keep you on the road if you follow these 6, and then you can make adjustments in there. So let's go ahead and continue to build out this workflow. And as I build it out, I'll just continue to explain why I'm using these methods and what is tying back into this process, okay? So the next thing, email the 30-minute consultation call scheduler. Now, if you remember from last week, we put email in there and in red because I need to remember to write a canned email for it so I don't forget that. So I'm going to go into the workflow here and we're going to just click add action and we're going to build out our next step. So I'm going to click this drop down here again, and I'm wanting to send a appointment scheduler. So if you remember from those guidelines, that immediately means that I'm using send appointment scheduler as my action. Immediately, I don't even have to think about any other action. I know I'm sending a scheduler. Send appointment scheduler is my action no matter what, okay? So I picked my action, what I want to do, now when I want this to go out. So let's look at our process. I want the scheduler to go out after I approve the new lead. Now, if you remember from our guidelines, always try to find the most specific trigger possible. There is nothing in our triggers that says after you approve the new lead. That's not a trigger that we have. So that means since there's nothing else that fits that better, I can say after all previous actions are complete because there's no other trigger in here that fits better. I just want it to be after I approve the new lead or once that to-do gets completed. And we don't have that as a trigger. So after all previous actions are complete works the best, okay? And the other thing is, if I look at my process, I want to approve that because remember, I'm approving it once I see if that lead is good. So right here, and this is any time that you're sending content to a client. When you're sending an email or a form or a scheduler, you have the ability right underneath the when to require approval before completing this action. So when we talked about writing out your process, remember I said that that's possible. So anything in your process that you need to approve, you should have already marked that you need to do that. So I can just click this little require approval. And what that does is it sends an email to you that says, hey, do you want this to go out yet? And it basically holds that action in place until you're ready to approve it. So I'm going to require approval before completing this action. And then there's a couple other things here that I'll kind of cover really quickly because I want to, keep moving through this workflow. But anytime that you're sending content to a client like a form or a contract or a scheduler, it gives you options for basically where you want to send it. And that's kind of another side of it. That actually gives me some ideas for the next time I do a webinar like this. I might add in where this is going to go as well. Just thought of that. Anyway, so with this, you can say, do I want to send this as an email? Do I want to just apply this to their portal? So I'm bypassing the email and I'm just uploading it into their portal. Or I can say I just want to apply it to the project only. That means that I'm not sending it to their portal. I'm not emailing it to them. The client doesn't have access to it. I just want to apply this to the project. Maybe this is good for like internal use. Maybe if you're going to be booking the appointment for the client, you just apply it to the project. Or if it's like an internal notes thing that you're using, you could just apply it to the project. But here, I want to email it. So we'll just leave it as the default there. Now, we picked what we want to do, when we want it to go out. And now this is where all the content comes into play. It's going to ask you, which piece of content do you want to send out? So here it's going to say, okay, which scheduler template do you want to use? And so if I click this drop down, it will show me the scheduler templates that I have built already, which in here, very simple. I want to send out my 30-minute consultation. And so that plugs in there. Then it's going to ask me, what email do you want to use? So just a quick break here. Remember with that process, if you don't have an email written at this point, and when I'm on the phone with a lot of people, this is where a lot of people miss out, is the content as far as the email is concerned. So here, I already have my scheduler, but now it's going to ask from my canned emails, which one of these do I want to use as the vehicle to send that scheduler to the client? If I don't have this written, I need to back out of here, go to my canned emails, write that email, then go back to the workflow and build it. It's very inefficient. It can take you out of that flow. So again, if you have all your content built ahead of time, you can see how easy this is to just plug in whatever content it is that you need to send. So here, I have my email down here, scheduler 30-minute consultation invitation. So I just click on that. And now it says, let's jump on a call. Hi, client name. I reviewed your inquiry form and it looks like I'm available. I'd love to get on the phone with you and discuss your event further. Once you schedule your appointment, I will be sending you a questionnaire to fill out prior to our meeting. This will give me a baseline to go off of when we meet. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email and then the scheduler link. Now, if you remember from the guidelines, again, this is just kind of following these 6 tips. If you're emailing a scheduler, you will always send the appointment scheduler. That's going to be your action, and have that scheduler link in the email. A lot of questions we get is, how does it know which scheduler to put in there? Well, if you're using Send Appointment Scheduler, you get this little drop down here that tells you which content is going to be going into this bracket here to create that button. So that's why you need that scheduler link in the email, is because it's going to look at what scheduler you picked and it's going to plug it into that bracket. This is also why you can't have multiple schedulers, because you can only choose one here. So if I had 3 or 4 scheduler links in there, I can't choose which scheduler goes with which link, if that makes sense. So I have my scheduler link, and now I'm finished with that action. Really easy to just plug that in there, okay? Now, the next thing, we're just going to go right back and reference our process. I'm not building things randomly here. I have a purpose and a structure. I want to email the bridal questionnaire once the client has booked their consultation. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to click action. So what is it that I want to do? I want to send out a form to the client. So the action that I'm going to pick here, remember, if I'm sending out a questionnaire, a proposal, or a sub-agreement, I'm doing send form. Doesn't matter what other actions are on this list. I already know it's send form. So I'll click send form here. That's going to pop up the same modal. Now when? If I'm being very specific about the triggers, remember, I have to be very specific about it. I only want this form to send out once the client has booked their consultation. So when I look at my list of different triggers, which one will fit the best? I could just throw after all previous actions are complete on there, but that's not the most specific one. And if I did that, it would actually send out as soon as the appointment scheduler sends out, which I don't want. I only want it once they book. So in the list of triggers, after appointment is scheduled is the best one there, because that is the most specific trigger that will clarify when that form is going to go out. So I can say send form immediately after an appointment is scheduled. Now, it's going to ask me, okay, you want me to send out a form once they book an appointment. What scheduler template am I looking at here? What should I be looking at? And so when I click this drop down, it's going to give me a list of all of the appointment schedulers that are in this workflow. And right now there's only one, so it makes it obviously really easy. But if I had multiple schedulers going out in here, I could choose which one I want to look at. So I'll choose 30-minute consultation. So now I want to send a form immediately after they schedule something on their 30-minute consultation, and the workflow will watch for that appointment to get booked, and then it will send this form. Okay, now do I need to require approval? Well, let's look at my process. I don't have an approve button on there. I don't need to approve anything, so I won't put it on there. This again is why so many workflows can be so different. Someone could say, no, I do want an approve button on there. Someone else could say, no, I don't really need it. That's why there's no such thing as just kind of a one size fits all workflow, because it all depends on what it is that you want to do. So I don't want to require approval. I do want to send an email here. And now it's right back to that content portion. If I don't have my bridal questionnaire built, I have to go out and build it and then come back to the workflow. If I don't have my email written, I need to come back out, write the email and then come back and write that. So again, content. If you have it in here, all I need to do is look at my list and I need to find my bridal questionnaire. Boom, add that in there. And then the email that I want to use, I'll look at my list here, and here is my bridal questionnaire email, and just plug that in. Now I'll just read through this here really quick. Hi, client name. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. Before we jump on the phone, I need you to fill out the questionnaire below so that we have a foundation to build off of when we speak during our consultation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Now I have that form link in there because, again, follow the little guidelines here. If you're sending a form, questionnaire, proposal, or sub-agreement, you will always use send form and have a form link in there, because right here, this is the form we're wanting to send, and this is going to be where it plugs in. You're basically kind of just matching things up, if you will. One thing that I will say, and this is just kind of from a business perspective, not really Dubsado related, but if you look at this email here, It's explaining what's going to happen. I'm using these emails to kind of guide my clients through the experience. If you remember from my appointment scheduler email, I said, hey, once you book, you're going to be receiving a questionnaire. I prepped them so they knew what they're going to be getting into. As a business owner, don't think it's weird to put in instructions on what they're going to be going through. You might be familiar with Dubsado and how it works and going through proposal, contract, and invoice, but they might not be familiar with that. So it's not a bad thing in your email to say, hey, I need you to fill this out so we have a foundation, or in my other email to say, hey, once you book, I'm going to be sending you X, Y, and Z, so be on the lookout for it. I'm kind of guiding them through this, sequence. So boom, I have my form, email, apply. So that's in there, easy, okay? The next thing that we have here is I want to send a follow-up email to the client if they haven't completed the questionnaire in 3 days. Again, very specific here. So if I go here and I click add action, again, we're just building on top of things. I want to send an email to them, or I want to basically send a follow-up email to them if they haven't completed their form in, I said 3 days. Was that the right one? I said 3 days. Yes. So there's a couple things here that I want to, it's not necessarily apparent in Dubsado, but I just want to kind of coach you through what you're able to do. It's kind of a cool workaround, if you will. So if you were thinking about this, what you would normally do is you would say send email. Okay, you want to send an email to the client to remind them that they need to fill out their form. Okay, and we would say 3 days. And in this trigger list, what's the specific thing? Not after all previous actions are complete. We want to do it once a form is not completed. We were very specific there. So I would say after form is not completed, and then it's going to ask you, which form are we looking at that they're not going to complete? And when you click this drop down, again, it's kind of like the scheduler, but it'll show you all the forms that are in this workflow. And right now I only have one, so it makes it really easy. And I can click bridal questionnaire. So send email 3 days after form is not completed. That way it's only going to go out if they don't complete that questionnaire. And then here's the content. So I could just add an email in here and then boom, I would be good to go. But from a business perspective, what you would have to write in this email is, hey, you need to go back to the email that I originally sent you with that form, click on that link and access it, which from a client experience, you don't really want them to have to go back to that email and find that link to access the questionnaire. You would like it to also be in this email, which you actually can do, and I'll show you how to do that. So before I show you that, I just want to say that if this is the combination that you create, it will work, but you're not able to put the questionnaire in this email, in this follow-up. So let me show you how to do that. What I'll do is I'll actually change it to send form instead. So now what I'm telling the workflow is, instead of just sending an email, I want to send a form to the client. So again, all this is the same once they haven't filled out their bridal questionnaire, but now it's going to ask you, what form do you want to send if they haven't completed their bridal questionnaire? We want to send the bridal questionnaire. So in this drop down here, I can go down and I can grab that bridal questionnaire. And basically I'm telling the workflow, if they don't fill it out in 3 days, I want to resend this to them. That's how our forms work in Dubsado, is if you choose the same form, it will send the exact same form out to them. So you have to remember that with the forms. So I'm saying I want to send out my bridal questionnaire if they haven't completed it in 3 days. And now it's going to ask me, what email do I want to use? So I wrote out a bridal questionnaire follow-up email, which, if we're looking at this process, send a follow-up email, I should have done that already. So I already have the email, but the only difference is, if you see this here, I have that form link in the email. Now, if I just did send email and it was just a plain text email, that would work. But if I did send email and put this form link in there, then it's not going to give me that ability to choose what form goes in there. So that's why I have to change it. If you're using send form, you need to have that form link in there. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's something that you're able to do with the workflow. And it says, hi, client name. I noticed you haven't filled out your questionnaire yet. Before our appointment, I will need you to fill this out so I can have a better idea of what you're interested in. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. I write that in everything, but then it has the form link in there. So what this is going to do, which is really cool, is it's going to say send form, the bridal questionnaire, if the bridal questionnaire is not completed in 3 days. So it's going to resend that form to them in 3 days. Then the last thing in my inquiry workflow is a task to say prepare for the consultation. So this I won't really explain because we've already talked about that. So if I click add action, I can just say create to do. I can assign it to myself if I want to. Now the when, I want to have the consultation or the task to get created for me 24 hours before the consultation. It's not enough for me to say I want to prepare for the consultation whenever. You can't do that with workflows. You have to be specific. I want to get reminded that I need to prepare for this consultation 24 hours before the consultation. So what I'm going to do here as far as the task is I'm going to say, I could say 1 day, but I'll be very specific here and I'll say 24 hours just to be literal. So 24 hours. And now when I want to be reminded of this, that I need to prep for this 24 hours before their appointment starts. So I can't just do after all previous actions are complete. I have to look for a very specific one. And in here, we have one that is before an appointment start time. So I can click that and it's going to again say, okay, which scheduler are we looking at? And we'll click that drop down and I only have one. So again, very simple. And I can click that. And now what is it that I want to put as my task? So I'll just say prep for consultation with, and again, if I use smart fields, because I can plug those in, I'll just put the client's name in there. So it will give me that info. Now, let's say that maybe the consultation is a phone call. So what I could do here maybe is say prep for consultation with client name, and I maybe would put in the client's phone number. So now I don't have to go and dig for this client's phone number. It's just going to pop up on my task. So this is just kind of cool things that you can do with smart fields. But that's going to be what I'll create as a task 24 hours before their appointment, the consultation. I want to prep for a consult. I don't want to send myself an email here. I don't really need an email, so I'm not going to click it. Again, someone else might want that. So again, it's all up to you and how you want your workflow to be. Boom. I have 5 actions and my workflow, my inquiry workflow is done. Those 5 actions, if you look here, those 5 are built in there and that's all my inquiry workflow is. Now we're going to transition into the booking workflow and we're going to build that out. Okay. There's only really 3 actions in this one. So this one will move a little bit faster, but I'm going to take that same logic and I'm going to move into my booking workflow. Okay. So let's go back to my workflow templates. Again, I have my inquiry workflow. Now I want to build out my booking workflow. So I'm going to jump into this one here. And the very first thing, wait for my computer to load up here. Come on now. So with this, what we're going to do, I'll wait for this to populate. I don't know why my computer is running so slow here. Give me 1 second. I'll refresh my screen and then wait for that to load up. But what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be emailing the proposal, contract, and invoice out after the consultation is over. Let's see. Okay, it looks like it's loading up here. There we go. Okay, perfect. So I have my booking workflow here, and I'm going to click add action. So what is it that I want to do? I want to send out my proposal. If you remember the guidelines, if you're sending a proposal, that's a form. So I'm going to do send form. Very easy to follow here if you kind of stick to those guidelines. So I'm going to click here. I'm not even going to look at any of the other actions because I already know it's a proposal. So it's going to be send form. So I have that pulled up there. Now, when do I want this to happen? Okay. After the consultation is over. Now, this is very interesting here because in my mind, I'm going to think to myself, okay, after the consultation is over, so I would use after appointment has ended. But if you remember from kind of our rules and guidelines, I can only use after appointment has ended if that scheduler is in the workflow, which it's not. So what am I going to do now? Because I can't have it watch for that scheduler. I need to make it now after all previous actions are complete. This is going to make a lot more sense a little bit later because right now you're probably thinking that doesn't really make too much sense. It will here in just a little bit. So I'm going to use after all previous actions are complete because nothing else works. I can't use after appointment is ended. So this is going to be the one that I'm going to use. And do I need to approve this? Yes, I want to approve this. So I'll click a little require approval here. And now really easy, the content. So I'll click this drop down. I'll grab my bridal proposal. It's right there at the top. And then the email that I'm going to use to send that form. So I click here and I have my bridal proposal email. This one, it's basically says, had such a great time speaking with you during your consultation. I have a great idea of what you're wanting. Below is a proposal, contract, and invoice. You can go through the proposal, select the packages and add-ons. It's going to total at the bottom. Once you're finished, it's going to take you to the contract, and then it's going to take you to the invoice. I'm giving the instructions to the client here so they know what's going to happen. If you have any questions, just send me an email, form link, okay? It's all in there. So I'll click apply. All right. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to send a follow-up email. Now, I'm going to use that same logic with the questionnaire. If they don't complete the proposal in X amount of days, resend the proposal. So I'll build these two out here really quickly at 3 days and at 7 days. Okay. So add action, and we're going to do send form 3 days. After a form is not completed, which form? We're looking at that proposal, okay? What do I want to do? I want to resend that proposal. So the form that I want to send is the proposal, and now I need my email, which I have right here, proposal follow-up number 1, because we're sending 2, so I have 2 different emails here. Here's the follow-up number 1. I noticed you haven't filled out your proposal yet. In order for us to continue with the process, I need you to do these things. Here's the form link. So remember, I'm always putting that link in there, okay? And we'll click apply. Then we're going to basically do the same thing at 7 days. So I'll just basically go in here, say send form, and 7 days this time. After form is not completed, same logic, bridal proposal. I'm not going to do approval or anything. I don't want it on there. You could, but I'm not going to put that on there. The bridal proposal is what we're resending. And now I'm going to use proposal follow-up number 2. This has a little bit different phrasing in there. Last time checking in, I still haven't received your proposal, but it's basically the same thing. Okay. And we'll click apply. That's my booking proposal. If you look here, that's all that there is before they would become a booked client, because all of this here, activate the client portal, send or set the client portal password, that's all after they've booked. So I would build these in the booked workflow. So right now, I have my booking workflow done, which many of you are probably thinking, what in the world is this? It's only 3 actions, but we'll continue to work on this. And I have my inquiry workflow here. So I have that done. Now we're going to take these 2 workflows here, and we're going to basically take it from like a 1.0 version into a 2.0 version. Okay. So I'm going to now talk about, Oh, one other thing here, it's a key that I want to just give you here before we transition kind of into the last little bit, is always looking at previously sent content will give you possible triggers to play with. I'll show you what I mean here. In my booking workflow, I've sent out my proposal, contract, and invoice all in this particular action. And that's another thing. If you have that all bundled together, you only have to use one action. You don't have to say proposal, send contract, send invoice. You don't have to do all of that. You just need to send out that proposal, and all of it is in there. Okay, so I have proposal, contract, and invoice all in that mix. Because I've sent all those three things out, now I have a lot of different triggers I can play with. I could use after form is completed. I could do after form is not completed. I could do after contract is signed. I could do after invoice is paid in full. And also I want to tie this in as well, when you are sending out your proposal, this is where you should add in your payment schedule in this particular workflow, because this is where you're actually booking with them. So in here, I'm going to add my 50/50 workflow in, or 50/50 payment schedule in this workflow, because that's where they're going to be getting invoiced. So another kind of gem for you or key for you is wherever your proposal comes into play, whatever phase that is, that's where you want your payment schedule, because that's where the invoice is getting created and that's where they're actually moving to an invoice. So in here, I can also use the trigger after scheduled payment is completed and wait for them to make their deposit as well. So there's a lot of things in here that I can use based off of what is previously sent content. So in your workflows, what you should do if you're kind of struggling for what triggers you can use here, always look at what's been sent beforehand. So in this workflow, I could use after appointment is scheduled, before an appointment start time, after an appointment start time. I could use after a form is completed, after a form is not completed. So always look above, maybe for some triggers that you can use moving forward. Let's see here. So I have that in there. Now I want to talk about project statuses and tags. Now, this was a big thing that people were asking about on the other two webinars. Now I'm going to deep dive into it. So we have a workflow that is basically like a 1.0 version. Now we're going to take it to the next level, so it's more advanced and automated. So what are project statuses? Project statuses are milestones that you can create to show where the client is at in your workflow. So a good analogy that I like to use, or an illustration I like to use for this, is it's kind of like a road trip. If your client journey or your workflow is them going from, let's say, Portland, Oregon, all the way over to, I don't even know where that's ending up, Cape Cod, that is your client workflow. That's the journey that they're going on from point A to point Z. What project statuses are the milestones or the points of interest along the way that you need them to stop at, or that you want to make sure that they've crossed over that point. So if I'm looking at this and I'm having my client go through this journey, I want to know when they've crossed through Mount Rushmore. I need to know that they've reached that milestone. So with your project statuses, if we go back to the projects page here, and we talked about this kind of on some previous webinars, and you kind of have an idea about this already, but if you look at my statuses, they are an exact replica basically of what I'm doing in the workflow. So I'm sending out a consultation. So I'm waiting for my consultation to get booked. They book the consultation, then they need a proposal, then the proposal and contract goes out to them. I also have a follow-up status there. Underneath the job section here, I have contract signed, deposit paid, welcome email sent, awaiting trial booking, their trials booked, 4 weeks out, 1 week out, send thank you gift. This is literally, if you were to think about it in terms of this being a workflow process. These are all of those different milestones that me as a business owner, I need to make sure that they're crossing over. So that's how you should treat statuses, is where they are in your actual workflow process or funnel, if you will. Now, the key to determining what statuses work best for you, because we get a lot of questions on, well, what statuses should I have? What you need to do is look at your workflow and determine in your workflow what's important to me. What matters to me that I need to know that they've crossed over these phases of my workflow. Remember that when you're looking at these statuses up here, this is just for inspiration, not imitation. And that's how your workflow should be in general. You can get inspired by different workflow ideas, but it should not imitate your exact workflow because it's going to be different for you. So what we can do here is we can look at this round here. So round 3, and I kind of call it round 3. It doesn't have to be that, but basically what I'm doing here, this is the workflow process that I put together, these 2 workflows. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually going to write out what I want my statuses to be. So if I'm looking at my process here, the first thing that I want to know is when I'm waiting for a consultation to be booked. That's at this stage here. So I want to know when I'm waiting for them to book, and I want to know when they've actually booked. Let's see, bridal questionnaire. Does that matter to me? No, not really. For somebody else with the exact same process, that step might matter. They might say, I need to know when they fill out their bridal questionnaire. So they want to make that a status. For me, doesn't really matter. So I'm not going to make it a status. That's why it's really up to you and what matters to you as a business owner. You can make these as granular as you want to, or as macro as you want them to be. Send a follow-up email. Yes, I want to know if they're in that follow-up phase. So I'll create a follow-up status. Let's see here. Do I need to get a status to prep for the consultation? No, that's not really important to me. So I'm not going to make it a status. Do I want to know when they need to get their proposal? Yes, that is important to me. So I'll do needs proposal. I also want to know when it goes out to the client, so I know how many proposals I have out there. So proposal and contract sent. I also want to know when they've signed their contract. That's a big one for me. So I'll do contract signed, and when they've paid their deposit. So I'll do deposit paid. So as you can see here, you're basically just going through your workflow and looking at each action and saying, does this matter to me? Do I need to know when they go through here? No, not really. Yes, I want to know that. No, I don't need to know that. That's how you can determine your project statuses, is by just literally doing that. Go through each action, ask yourself, it's kind of like that, the Marie Kondo, asking yourself, holding it to your chest, does this have any meaning to me? I forget what the exact phrase is, but that's really what it is. Go through each action and say, does this have value to me? Do I need this in my statuses? If not, throw it out, get rid of it. We're decluttering. So that's basically, yes, that's exactly what it is. Sparking joy. Does this status spark joy? I absolutely love that. So that's basically how you're going to create your statuses, and you're going to do that underneath customize over here on the right-hand side. This is where you can build out your different statuses. Use emojis if you want to. I love using emojis, like I said, but you don't have to. But that's where you're going to create your different leads and your different jobs. In here, you can see where I have it specifically set out that these are leads, these are jobs, and I have it listed. And remember when we wrote out our process where we defined when they become a booked job, I actually wrote it here. This is when they become a booked job. So that should be the first status in my job section. So contract signed, that'll be the first one in jobs. If deposit paid, if them paying the deposit was my indicator that they're a job, I would put contract signed over in the lead section, because they're technically still not a job yet. I need money in my hand first. So deposit paid would be my first one there. It's all up to you and how you want to do it there. Okay. So that's what you're going to do next, and then build those statuses. So I already have them built, but that's what you would do. You would list them out. You don't have to write them out, but if you want to, it makes it easier. And now go through and build all of those and find the emojis that you want to use for each one. So those are statuses. Now let's talk about tags. Tags in Dubsado are like hashtags. It's literally a way that you can search for the type of client you're working with, maybe the actual package they're on, maybe it is if they're in state or out of state, all the different types of clients or the service that you're providing for them or a demographic. So for example, a list of tags here would be like logo design, graphic design, branding, portraits, headshots, one-on-one coaching, group coaching. It's basically a way that you're defining what type of client it is that you're working with. What a lot of people normally do when I look at people's accounts, they'll have their tags, what should be tags, as their statuses. They would have like one-on-one coaching, group coaching. You don't want that. You want to use tags because, as you can see here, next to each one of these projects, I have the type of client that they are. So print and film, headshots, or this one is a wedding. I have a Sweet 16. And where you can create these tags is, again, under the customize section here, and we'll click on that. Down at the bottom is where you can create your different tags, and you can add as many tags as you want to a client. A great example would be if you're kind of in the web design industry, maybe you have web design, web maintenance, and SEO as the 3 tags for that one project. You can do something like that. With the tags, you can add as many as you want to on there, where as with the statuses, they can only be in one place at one time. So using that same analogy, if I had web design as one, website maintenance and website SEO, I can't have them all in 3 statuses at one time. You can only be in one place at a time, so you don't use tags for your statuses. This should be where they are, and this should be what type of clients you're working with. So what does this give you if you have that? I can go to, let's say, contract signed. And I know that at this phase, everyone who is here should have their contract signed at minimum, okay? So they all have their contract signed. They haven't paid their deposit yet, as you can see. That would be the next phase. But I could say, who are all of my contract signed people that are weddings? And maybe I have a huge list here. What you can do is, if you click on this filter button right here, you can actually filter by tag in what status you're in. So I could go to contract signed and I could say, let me see all of my wedding people. And it will pull up everybody who has that tag on their project. So not only am I seeing where they are, but I can also see what type of client I'm working with. Maybe I want to go to all of my jobs here. So let me see all of my jobs and let me see all of my people who are weddings. So it's only going to pull up those projects that have that wedding tag. This is how you can filter and sort. If you remember at the very first webinar we had, I mentioned and I said, the whole purpose of this projects page is to be able to come in here and confidently manage your clients. If this is not organized, then you're going to say, okay, where's that client? Where is this one? By having the tags and statuses all created, now you know exactly where people are at. You can find them quickly by using your tags and statuses. Another one that could be kind of a cool one, if you're kind of in the event space, let's say, maybe you want to say, okay, my 1 week out people, who are all of my people in the next week that are this type of client? Or who are my people that are at 4 weeks out that are this type of client? That's what you can do with this projects page to keep yourself organized. So how does this work with workflows? Obviously, you don't want to create these and then manually have to say, okay, they signed the contract, let me manually update their status. You don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do now, just to tie all of this in, is I'm going to put these project statuses into this workflow, okay? So if I get a new inquiry here and I were to add this workflow and start it, they would never go down this line here. They would basically just sit in this new inquiry status, and I wouldn't get any movement with this project. So I have to build these into the workflow where it will change the project status based off of certain things. So now we're going to take our 1.0 version of the workflow and turn it into a 2.0 version. So I'm going to look at my statuses here. I already have my new inquiry status. That's where they're getting dropped in from my lead capture form. You can choose what status you want them to drop into from the lead capture in the settings, just a little extra bit of information. But the first status I have here is awaiting consultation. So I would want them to get dropped into that status once the scheduler has gone out to them. So I've sent the scheduler and I'm waiting for them to book on it. So what I would do here is I would go into my workflow and I'll go to that inquiry workflow here because this is the one we're going to kind of manipulate. My statuses are built. Now I can come in here and I can make some changes in here, or some additions rather. So I'm going to say add action. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start adding in a lot of project status changes into this workflow. So if we click on the actions drop down, the very first action is change project status. We're basically going to use this over and over and over again. Change project status, change project status. So I'll click this, and now it's going to ask me, when do you want me to update this status? Well, I want you to update it as soon as the scheduler goes out. If you remember from those guidelines, look for that. Is there a trigger that we have that says once you've sent the scheduler? No, we don't have anything like that. So after all previous actions are complete is the best one. I'm telling you, if you use those guidelines, it really keeps you on the road here. So I want to change a project status immediately after all previous actions are complete. And you'll see why you'll use that here once I get through this part. So status for the project, what do I want to change it to? I want to change it to awaiting consultation right there. So that's the status I wanted to move into, and I'm going to click apply. Now it's going to put it at the bottom down here of the workflow, but what you can do is you can click and drag and move this where you want it to go, which chronologically that would go right after the scheduler goes out to the client. Because remember, right here is where I'm sending it. So right after it sends, I want it to update that status. What's the next one? Once they book a consultation. Now, I already have that trigger here once they schedule their appointment, after appointment is scheduled. So that's going to be the trigger that I'm going to use for my next project status change. So I'll click add action, change project status. We're just going to keep using this when I want it to move into consultation booked after they book their appointment. Pretty simple there. So I'm going to say immediately after an appointment is scheduled. And which scheduler are we looking at? Again, it's kind of that same logic. I'm going to look at my 30-minute consultation. So once they book on that appointment, it's going to move them into consultation booked. And I'll click apply. Now, chronologically, that would go probably either here or I could put it here because it's once they book. So I'm just clicking and dragging and adding it to that chronological order. What's the next one that I have on my projects page here? I have needs proposal. So that would be once they need a proposal is once that consultation is over. So I would come in here, click add action again, change project status. So once that consultation is over, that's when I want it to tell me, hey, they need their proposal. So I would say immediately after the appointment has ended. So I can use that as the trigger. Once that appointment is over, and I can, again, we're watching that consultation. Now I can say I want to move it into needs proposal. So the combination here, once that consultation is done, I want it to move into, okay, now they need their proposal. And that would go chronologically, I would say, probably right where it is, because this is 24 hours before their appointment start time. This is after. And again, I'm OCD, so I want everything to be chronologically where it would make sense here. So the next thing that I have is proposal and contract sent. Now, if I'm looking at this, I don't have anything in here that has the proposal in it to watch for it. So I'm done with my project status changes with this workflow. So what did I do? I added in all of these status changes. So not only is it going to send these things out, it's going to move them down that timeline. Okay. Now I'm also going to, we talked about tags. I'm going to click add action. And the second action that we have here is called add tag. So I can click add tag here. And when I want to add this tag in, because I want to put like a wedding tag on this particular workflow, is I could say after the workflow starts, once this workflow starts, I want to add a tag. So let's say as soon as this workflow kicks in from the lead capture, I want to add my wedding tag. And so now I could have made a bridal tag maybe, but I'll just put wedding. So now what this is basically saying is once this workflow starts, I want to add this particular tag. And if this is after workflow is started, I would probably put this at the very beginning just for the chronological aspect of this, okay? So not only have I tagged this, but I've also added in my project status changes, so they're gonna go through this flow. Now, I'm gonna do the same thing with my other workflow. So let's go to the booking workflow, and we're gonna add in just a couple more project status changes. So one, I want it to be once they have the proposal and contract. So proposal and contract sent is my next status. So I'm gonna click add action here, change project status again, and we want it to be once the proposal goes out. There's not a trigger that is once the proposal is sent. So I'm gonna use after all previous actions are complete, and I'm going to say proposal contract sent. Okay, and I'll click apply. And I'll just drag this right up underneath here. And I can do some of the same things here. I can say after the contract is signed, after invoice is paid in full, maybe. I have some different things here. I want to kind of move through this because I know we're a little bit over time and I want to wrap this up, but you kind of understand the concepts here that's happening. So the last couple things here that I want to talk about, and then I'll open it up for some questions, is archiving projects and starting a workflow. So you might be looking at this and saying, we'll talk about start a workflow first. On this inquiry workflow here, how do we get it so once they get done with this, it goes to the next workflow because we're building it in phases. So what you can add to the bottom of your workflows, if you will, is add action. And we have an action in here that is called start a workflow. Now, you don't have to use this if you don't want to, but you would have to manually add your next workflow, which you don't want. So if you use start a workflow, what this lets you do is start a workflow from another workflow. This is why we recommend building things in phases, is because you can start your next sequence from your previous sequence. So I'm going to say start a workflow once everything else is done. So this after all previous actions are complete is saying once they move through all of this, now I want to apply my booking workflow. So I'm telling the workflow basically once they move through everything, I want the next sequence to start. So that is an important action to have if you're building things in phases. The other thing that I want to talk about is archiving a project, because this will also help you keep your lead list very clean. So let's go to the other workflow that I have, and then we'll kind of wrap things up here. I know this is kind of a longer workflow or a longer webinar because, you know, there's a lot to go through here, but with this particular workflow, let's say that if they don't fill out their proposal, I want them to get off of my leads list because I know they're not going to be moving forward. So what I can do here is I could say add action, and the other action that I wanted to talk about besides start a workflow is the action archive project. There are other actions on the list, but these ones are very specific when it comes to automation. So archiving this, if you archive a lead, it deletes invoices, which is a good thing. If they're not moving forward, you don't want to keep those invoices in place, so you can archive them. But what you could do is something like this. This just adds more automation to your process, is you could say something like, if they don't fill out the proposal in, I'll give them 2 weeks. So we'll put this at 2 weeks here and say after they haven't filled out their form, so after a form is not completed, and we'll just watch for that proposal, then it's going to archive the project for me. So I'm sending out a follow-up email at 3 days, sending out another one at 7 days. And if they haven't completed it after 2 weeks, I'm just going to say, okay, let's just get this off the list. They're not moving forward. You could do 10 days or something, but you can use things like that to get them off of off your lead list. So they're no longer in that list of people you're not moving forward with. So a couple advantages of using workflows in phases for those of you who might say, why should I build them in phases? A couple things. One, it's easier to digest and make updates and changes. If you have just one massive long workflow, it's really hard to kind of digest that whole thing. This kind of splits it up so it's easier to take in. Number two, invoices won't get created prematurely. When you add a payment schedule to a workflow and you add that into a project, it's going to make an invoice right away, which you may not want because they haven't moved forward. If you build it in phases, it's only going to create that invoice once they get to the booking side of things. So that way you don't have a lot of empty invoices. You have it only when they get to that booking phase. They've moved through the consultation and now they're in that booking phase. Project date triggers are another key thing. So for example, if you have project date triggers and they set the project date from the lead capture and you have something that's X amount of days before the project start date, that's going to fire right away. But if you wait until kind of the booked phase of things comes in, then those are only going to get added into the workflow once they get to that phase. And then the last one, and this is a big one, a lot of people that are coming from another CRM, they want to start people like halfway through their process. So what I can do now is if I have this in phases, I can say, okay, I'm just going to start someone from the booking side of things or from the booked side of things. I don't have to start them at the very beginning and delete actions all the way until they get there. You can basically just, start them at whatever phase in the process you want them to be on. So that is just some advantages there. Now, the homework assignment, and then I'll answer some questions here. Number one, you're going to build your 1.0 version of the workflow. So you're just going to add in your actions, just like I did. Build whatever is on your process, okay? The next thing you're going to do is decide on and build your project statuses and tags. So you're going to look at your workflow, decide what statuses spark joy, and you're going to build those in your actual brand. Then you're going to go in, you're going to add in all of those project statuses and tags, just like what I did. So you're going to mix those in and kind of create your 2.0 version. And then the most important thing, don't think I would let you get away with this. You need to test your workflow. What you're going to do is you're going to go into your projects page and you're going to create yourself as a client. So in my lead section over here, I have a test project right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this project and I'm going to click on the workflows tab right here. And I'm going to apply a workflow manually from this drop down. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, okay, inquiry workflow. This is the workflow that I want here. And I'm going to click apply. And now it's just going to go. So it's going to give me a wedding tag. Then it's going to create a to-do for me to confirm the date, all of those good things, but I'm now running a test on myself. So that's what you should be doing when you're done with your workflow, is run it on yourself. So that way you get comfortable with how it's going to work. Okay. So that is all that I have for today. And I hope that that shows you how to break down a workflow, bring it into Dubsado, and how you can get those statuses and tags to work in sync with that workflow so you can really maximize your automation.